Assalamu alaikum. Today we're going to talk about the Haqqani-Bajwa files, revelations about the nexus between Hussain Haqqani and Pakistan's former army chief, General retired Javed Bajwa, and their role in the regime change operation that led to the end of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan's democratically elected government. We are fortunate to have with us today the person who broke the story back in December 2022, Waqas Ahmed, who is on Twitter as Waqas. He's an independent journalist and a news editor who's worked both in the US and in Pakistan. He's the founder of a brand new member founded news website called Brief. Welcome, Waqas.
Thank you so much for having me, Saman.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for the time. So tell us about the Haqqani Bajwa file story that you broke. What light do these revelations shed on the regime change operation that toppled Imran Khan's government, democratically elected government?
Yeah, so basically, we've been looking for proof of any wrongdoing or illegal acts involved in the vote of no confidence, the constitutional vote of no confidence that happened in April 2022, which toppled Imran Khan's government. And we've long suspected since the very first day that there was Pakistani establishment's involvement in that, which of course makes the whole move illegal. Because if illegal, unconstitutional moves were involved in a constitutional process, that negates the whole process. So we've been looking for proofs of the military establishment's involvement in that, and that the army chief at the time, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, his involvement in this political process, which is obviously against his oath and against the Pakistani constitution. So Haqqani Bajwa file is the smoking gun, is the proof that Mr. Qamar Javed Bajwa exceeded his mandate, exceeded the powers that were granted to his office, and he conspired behind the back of his PM to make some moves that eventually caused the end of Mr. Imran Khan's government. That is Haqqani Bajwa files.
Excellent. And then you happened to meet Haqqani, Hussain Haqqani?
Yes, matter of fact, I did meet Mr. Haqqani, and one of the original clues about this whole thing, about this whole collusion and Mr. Bajwa's moves that he was doing behind the back of his prime minister, that clue came from Mr. Haqqani himself when he claimed that he met Mr. Bajwa in UAE
All right.
around September 2021. So, and we later, I discovered that Mr. Bajwa had engaged Mr. Haqqani very formally to lobby in the US on his behalf.
I see. So could you just tell us a few details about your meeting with Hussain Haqqani?
Yeah, sure. This was around July 2022.
Mhm.
I had been investigating Mr. Haqqani, and I had been investigating Mr. Bajwa and his role behind Imran Khan's toppling of Imran Khan's government, the regime change in Pakistan. So I had been investigating this, and I got an opportunity to go to Mr. Haqqani and had a private meeting with him with a friend of mine who was a very close acquaintance of Mr. Haqqani. Mr. Haqqani at that time felt comfortable enough and said a few things off the record. And I, being a journalist, had complete intention to respect his wishes, basically off the record, the deal that we had, that I would not disclose those things. Mr. Haqqani in that meeting told me about his meeting with Mr. Bajwa, how he had been formally engaged by Mr. Bajwa, and how he's going to write a report for Mr. Bajwa when Mr. Bajwa finally comes to the US. So remember, I'm telling you about July 2022. So Mr. Bajwa eventually does go to the US, and that report that Mr. Haqqani was talking about does eventually get published. And that is a report that is, if you read it as a self-respecting Pakistani, it's not a very good report to read, because what Mr. Haqqani is advocating in that report is that the US government should have direct relationship with the Pakistani military establishment instead of going through the Pakistani democratically elected governments, which is basically a sign that, whoever the democratically elected government in Pakistan is irrelevant, and this is like completely unconstitutional. As far as if you're a Pakistani and you would not like such language against the Pakistani state, I would say. But Mr. Haqqani wrote this report, and the whole reason for this report was to build up the character of Mr. Bajwa. At that time, Bajwa had not retired, and at that time, he had complete intention to seek an extension. He wanted to prolong his tenure as the chief of army staff. So he had done many moves. So VONC, the regime change operation that happened, I feel that it was one of the many moves that Mr. Bajwa did to prolong his tenure. Until the end, till the day he retired, he made every attempt to try to make sure that his tenure as the army chief gets extended. He was unsuccessful in that, basically. But this was one of his attempts to engage Mr. Bajwa, Mr. Haqqani, to engage Mr. Haqqani, and to try to build his profile in the US, which is one of the reasons, which brings us to the documents, the hiring of Mr. Haqqani as a foreign agent.
And then Mr. Haqqani, I believe, worked with Robert Grenier, and is
Yeah.
that what that was mentioned in your report as well?
Yeah, so Mr. Robert Grenier is the former CIA station chief in Pakistan. He
Mhm.
came back to the US and eventually retired, and now he works for he runs a lobbying company. So think about Mr. Bajwa for a second.
Yeah.
Mr. Bajwa did not just hire Mr. Haqqani. Mr. Bajwa, in his brilliant, sharp, cunning mind, he hired a former CIA station chief. He thought that he's going to do a good job. He's going to ensure that my American base is covered while I pull this stunt off in Pakistan. This was his intention. So he hired Mr. Grenier, and Mr. Grenier brought Haqqani on board, and this was all known. So bringing Mr. Haqqani by Mr. Grenier is not something that Bajwa did not foresee. This was completely by design because Haqqani also met Bajwa, and they must have discussed this. They must have discussed this lobbying that Mr. Bajwa had engaged, and they must have discussed what the future course of action is. So when Mr. Bajwa finally hires Mr. Haqqani, and Mr. Haqqani completely changes his viewpoint of the world, his whole way of thought. He changes everything. What Mr. Haqqani had been saying for the past 5-7 years was that Pakistan military is the bad guy in South Asia. Mr. Haqqani was saying that Pakistani military is something that should not be engaged with at all in Pakistan. Mr. Haqqani had been saying that Pakistani military is the problem. Suddenly, in September 2021, Mr. Haqqani, after receiving his first payment, changes his tone, and he says that we must engage with Pakistani military. He says this outright, and without any build up, without any middle ground, without any like spectrum of like slowly moving his audiences to the other extreme. No, he does not do that. He suddenly flips, and that's an unexplained flip. This flip gets explained as soon as you look at the documents, as soon as you know about the meeting that they had in UAE.
And you have some documents to share with us, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, sure. But before I share that document, I'll tell you something interesting. So, since I broke this story in December, Mr. Haqqani went on this tour. He went to like Pakistani TV channels. He went to YouTubers, and he went to podcasters, and he went on this tour trying to explain himself. So in one of these shows, in like this YouTuber podcaster Shehzad Ghias show, he says something really interesting, and he claims that he had no relationship with Mr. Bajwa or whatever, like whoever hired Mr. Grenier's company from Pakistan, which is Mr. Iftikhar Durrani, by the way. So Iftikhar Durrani was chosen by Bajwa, by the Pakistani military establishment, as the front man for this deal. So one law is already broken. So the first law that is broken is that America requires all foreign agents to be registered. So Mr. Grenier got registered. FARA requires Mr. Grenier to tell the American government who he is registered on behalf of. So Mr. Grenier says that I'm registered on the behalf of Mr. Iftikhar Durrani. Mr. This whole process exists. This design exists because American government wants to know where the foreign money is coming from, where the money in America is coming from. If someone is speaking on someone else's behalf, American government wants to know on whose behalf this person speaks, right? So according to this FARA document, it says Mr. Grenier speaks on behalf of Mr. Iftikhar Durrani. But Mr. Iftikhar Durrani has gone on record to say that it was not him who was hiring Grenier. He said, he has the in Faria Idris show, he said that some people from the Pakistani military establishment asked him to sign on this FARA document. So as far as the American government is concerned, the principal, the person who is the foreign entity who has been paying Mr. Grenier is wrong. American government has been misled. It was actually the Pakistani military establishment that was paying Grenier, not Mr. Iftikhar Durrani. So the first law here is broken, where American government has been misled. So another thing, so now to mislead, this whole thing was done because nobody thought this would come out, right? So Mr. Iftikhar Durrani comes out and says it on a TV show that his involvement was limited to this. Now Mr. Haqqani goes to Shehzad Ghias' show and says, he says the payments that he received were from Mr. Grenier, and he had nothing to do with Iftikhar Durrani. He did some other research for Grenier, and he doesn't even know Mr. Iftikhar Durrani. So let's hear this clip where he claims that he doesn't know Iftikhar Durrani. His relationship is only with Grenier, and the work that he did, the research that he did was for someone else, was for not Mr. Iftikhar Durrani. Okay. So you can hear this clip now.
इसकी मिसाल ऐसी है कि आप मेरा इंटरव्यू कर रहे हैं, ये इंटरव्यू और मेरा आपका रिश्ता है। इसके अलावा आप क्या कर रहे हैं, ये मेरा रिश्ता नहीं है आपके साथ। तो ग्रेनियर साहब जो भी उनके साथ कर रहे थे, उससे मेरा कोई ताल्लुक नहीं था। मैं तो ग्रेनियर साहब के लिए कोई रिसर्च की, मैंने उनको एक रिसर्च करके उसकी इंफॉर्मेशन दे दी, उसकी मैंने पेमेंट दे दी, अल्लाह खैर से अल्लाह। अब वो दुरानी साहब के लिए काम कर रहे थे। खान साहब का कहना यह कि दुरानी साहब जो है वो जनरल बाजवा के लिए काम कर रहे थे। तो फिर खान साहब को जरा एहतियात करनी चाहिए ना कि वो ऐसी बद एहतियाती से ये कैसे कह देते हैं कि जनरल बाजवा ने हुसैन हक्कानी को हायर कर लिया। हुसैन हक्कानी का बात जनरल बाजवा से तो बराह रास्त कोई ताल्लुक ही वो साबित नहीं कर सकते। वो तो मेरा दुरानी से भी कोई ताल्लुक नहीं साबित कर पा रहे। ज्यादा से ज्यादा इतना है ना कि ग्रेनियर का ताल्लुक है दुरानी के साथ, हक्कानी का मिलना जुलना है, राब्ता है ग्रेनियर। तो इसमें से कहीं से कोई साजिश का सबूत नहीं है। ये सिर्फ ऐसा है कि फलाना भी नीला शलवार कमीज पहने हुआ था, फलाना भी नीला शलवार कमीज पहना हुआ था, इसलिए दोनों में कोई ताल्लुक होगा। ये क्या बात है?
आई मीन दो पॉसिबिलिटीज हैं। जाहिर बात है कि या तो बिल्कुल ही झूठ बोल रहे हैं वो, कि या तो उनकी नाक के नीचे टेंस ऑफ थाउजेंड्स ऑफ डॉलर्स का पीटीआई ने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट कर लिया एक फर्म के साथ यूएस में, और खान साहब को उस बात का इल्म ही नहीं था। तो दोनों पॉसिबिलिटीज डू नॉट मेक देम लुक गुड,
एंड नीदर पॉसिबिलिटी अफेक्ट्स मी। यानी आपने किसको हायर किया, उसने आपके साथ क्या सलूक किया, उसका उस काम से कोई ताल्लुक नहीं है जो मैंने किया है। मेरा काम अबव बोर्ड है, मेरा अलग कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है, मुझे पेमेंट अलग तरीके के साथ हुई है, और उस काम के लिए हुई है जो मैं लेजिटिमेटली करता हूं। मैं लॉबिस्ट नहीं हूं। अमेरिका में बड़े सख्त कवानीन है लॉबिंग के,
रजिस्टर होना पड़ता है,
आपको रजिस्टर होना पड़ता है। गैर मुल्कियों की नुमाइंदगी करने के लिए आपको रजिस्ट्रेशन फॉर्म भरना पड़ता है।
So in this clip, he claims that his relationship is with Mr. Grenier. He doesn't even know who Iftikhar Durrani is, and he didn't do any lobbying, and he didn't. So let's look at this document. That this is the FARA document that we have. So let's look closely at this. It says the foreign principal is Mr. Iftikharur Rahman Durrani.
Mhm.
He gives the money and it goes directly to Mr. Hussain Haqqani, 20,000 on September 6th, 2021. And then October 29th again, 2021, $10,000 again. And then Milo James Himberger. This guy, Milo James Himberger, he's some kid who works for Mr. Hussain Haqqani, by the way, in his thing, Hudson. At Hudson, he was his intern. Anyway, so we can clearly see that this is money that came from Iftikhar Durrani, and this money went to Mr. Haqqani.
Mhm.
And Mr. Haqqani is supposed to be aware of this fact. If he's doing for something, a foreign principal, he's supposed to be aware of this fact. And it is very clear in this document that this specific amount of money came from Iftikhar Durrani and went to Mr. Haqqani. And this is not the money that was meant for some other research. Mr. Haqqani was involved in some other research for some other guy, and Mr. Grenier decided to pool all the resources and then give some of the money to Mr. Haqqani. No, that's not it. This is a money that was specifically meant for Mr. Haqqani. And the research that he did for Mr. Iftikhar Durrani, we would really like to know what that research was. And I've been trying to ask Mr. Haqqani this, and he's been evading me since December, actually.
But he did meet with you in, and this was in Dubai, or was it in New York when he met?
That was in DC, in his home.
It was in DC.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, and what did he tell you during that
No,
meeting?
let me finish this thought.
Okay.
First. So basically, Mr. Haqqani receives this payment from Mr. Iftikhar Durrani and Mr. Haqqani in September. So the second law is being broken here. The second law is Mr. Haqqani is supposed to do research, right? And he's supposed to send that research to Iftikhar Durrani or whoever. We
Mhm.
would like to know the proof of this research. But what he actually does is, in September, he starts writing these articles in favor of Mr. Bajwa, in favor of the Pakistani military, which is the true foreign principle. He had first, like Mr. Bajwa had first like misrepresented who the foreign principal was. Now Mr. Haqqani, because this thing has been hidden, Mr. Haqqani can easily write articles and do lobbying activities while he does not claim to be a lobbyist. In this clip that we showed, he said that he's not a lobbyist, but writing articles, building a narrative is a lobbying activity, and that changes with the payments that he receives. So there are multiple laws that are broken, but Mr. Haqqani is not the main character. I would repeat, like I keep, this is a story that I've broken, and like I've been talking a lot about Mr. Haqqani, and Mr. Haqqani has been, because of this story, has been going on a tour of Pakistani TV channels and saying a lot of things. But the thing is, the most important thing is, Mr. Haqqani is not the main character of the story. He's not even an important character. He's just a cog in the machine. He's the person, he's the blabbermouth who spilled the beans in front of me. He's an idiot. So he was engaged by Mr. Bajwa. Mr. Bajwa is the one who hired the former CIA guy. Mr. Bajwa is the one who is orchestrating things in DC, who's orchestrating things in Lahore, in Karachi, in Islamabad. He's the main character. He's the villain of the story. Mr. Haqqani is the idiot who spilled the beans and got Bajwa in trouble. And this whole thing, because of Mr. Haqqani's brilliance, is a proof of Mr. Bajwa's treason. The fact that he went behind his prime minister's back and engaged a foreign lobbyist and decided to change his foreign policy and decided to reach out to foreign governments, and he decided to change, he decided to reach out to opposition politicians. All of these things, they are proofs of Mr. Bajwa's treason. And Mr. Bajwa's treason was to getting his the democratically elected prime minister, his boss, removed.
Right, and that sedition, that can actually be like he can be taken to court.
Yeah, he should be court-martialed. So because we know all of this, because we have a witness, because Mr. Iftikhar Durrani says that he was not the foreign principal, because we have this document that says that Mr. Grenier and Mr. Haqqani was hired, because Mr. Haqqani has claimed that he met Bajwa, and Faiz, by the way. And Faiz was like completely hands in glove with Mr. Bajwa. So because he has told us all of this, that
Just for our viewers, General retired Faiz was the then chief of the ISI.
yes,
Right. Yes.
he was the ISI chief.
Right.
And by the way, Mr. Grenier was engaged in July of 2021. And the first thing that he did was organized a conference for Mr. Faiz in DC, some kind of meetup, basically, because the lobbying started and the lobbying started bearing some fruits. So a lot of efforts. Basically, what was happening is, and what Mr. Imran Khan keeps on saying is that things were happening behind his back, and there were many things that were happening behind his back. Some were related to foreign policy, some were related to economy, some were related to reaching out to people like Mr. Haqqani and lobbying. All of these things were designed to push Imran Khan out of prime ministership. This was the conspiracy. Mr. Haqqani did not do any conspiracy. He played a cog in the machine of this grand conspiracy. He was the foot soldier of this stupid plan hatched by Mr. Bajwa to extend his tenure, to be the forever Führer of Pakistani military, to be, control the Pakistani politics. That was his grand design. And eventually, in that grand design, a lot of really crazy things happened. Mr. Imran Khan, they tried to assassinate him. Arshid Sharif was martyred. So all of these things, they're not coincidences. They're part of the same scheme that had been hashed by Mr. Bajwa, not by Mr. Haqqani, not by even Nawaz Sharif or anybody else. This was Mr. Bajwa's brainchild. And people who have, inherited Mr. Bajwa's legacy, who continue to take it forward, they're like part of the plan, obviously.
Now, Mr. Haqqani, you told us, actually did meet up with Mr. Bajwa himself.
Yeah, yes.
Right. And what were the details of that meeting?
So Mr. Haqqani claims that he was called to UAE by some UAE officials. He was invited into a room, and UAE officials were sitting next to him. And one by one, they left the room. And when everyone left the room, Mr. Haqqani was alone in the room. Mr. Bajwa, Mr. Faiz, and all of these people entered the room. They had a meeting with Haqqani. Haqqani likes to be dramatic. I'm sure he was informed beforehand who he was going to meet, because he flew from DC all the way to UAE. He's not going to do that like an idiot. They walk into a room. Mr. Faiz is there. Mr. Bajwa is there. Mr. Bajwa says, we need to build a new relationship with the US. So this is happening behind Prime Minister's back, right? Faiz is the DGISI. He's supposed to tell his prime minister if there are major foreign policy moves going on behind the prime minister's back. He does not. We know this now, that Faiz did not tell the prime minister about this meeting. So in this meeting, Bajwa says, we need to build new bridges with the United States. Can you help us? And Mr. Bajwa puts this whole thing, like his whole spiel in front of him. He's like, to make friendship with America, you need to do certain things. You need to be friends with Pakistan. Global dynamics are changing, and Pakistan is not lucrative anymore. Pakistan is not beautiful to America anymore. He gives this long lecture, and he claims that he did, at least. So Mr. Bajwa mostly agrees with him because Mr. Bajwa also has, as we now know, poor understanding of global dynamics and international relations. Mr. Bajwa agrees with him, and Mr. Bajwa is like, okay, help us with this, and then we'll make your coming back to Pakistan easier. And Mr. Haqqani says, I don't want to come back to Pakistan, but just, put me back on Pakistan, allow me back on Pakistani TV, and don't declare me a traitor anymore. Because as we know, Mr. Bajwa was declared disloyal to Pakistan by Justice Qazi Faiz Isa.
Haqqani was.
Mr. Haqqani was declared disloyal to Pakistan by Justice Qazi Faiz Isa in Memo Commission. Since then, he's been absent on Pakistani TV. Funnily enough, Mr. Haqqani has now come on Pakistani TV and is now giving interviews. So this was one of those things that was discussed by Mr. Bajwa, with Mr. Bajwa, when Mr. Haqqani met him.
Right.
So this is basically the meeting to build bridges with Mr. Haqqani, to hire him for lobbying in the US.
Right. So it was Mr. Bajwa then who really wanted to, get the US involved in
Yes.
this whole, the regime change operation
I
type of
think
thing?
what he really wanted to do was, uh, he wanted to ensure that when he pulls off a regime change operation, nobody nobody scolds him. Nobody says what you're doing is wrong. So Americans don't say what you're doing is wrong. The Pakistani opposition is on board. They don't say what you're doing is wrong. The Saudis, the Emiratis, nobody says that what you're doing is wrong. Usually, the Middle Eastern countries, they don't interfere in politics, especially when things come to democracy and stuff. They're not democracies. America is a democracy. America claims that it supports democracies abroad. So usually, America is not really happy when there's a military coup happening in other countries. And there was a military coup happening in Pakistan. What happened in Pakistan, in most simple terms, if we are being honest to ourselves and if we are being honest to the world, what happened in Pakistan in April 2022 was a military coup. It was orchestrated by Mr. Bajwa and by his generals who were on board. And there were many generals. The whole institution worked in a way that it helped topple the Imran Khan's government, which is completely unconstitutional. What Mr. Bajwa did behind the prime minister's back was completely unconstitutional. Him engaging different stakeholders, non-stakeholders, powers, everything completely unconstitutional. Mr. Faiz not telling the prime minister that this was happening behind his back, completely unconstitutional. That is insubordination, illegal, could be court-martialed. All of these people, what they did was illegal. They should be in jail.
Right. So now, why do you think General Bajwa did not want Imran Khan as the prime minister? Because wasn't it true that they were both so-called on the same page to begin with? Because many of the commentators, like particularly those who get exposure from the international media, some even asserted that Khan only became the prime minister because he had Bajwa's backing. So what's your view on that? What went wrong?
I don't think that's true. So if you go back to 2018 elections, not just 2018, you go back all the way to 2013, you see there was a gradual rise of PTI and Imran Khan. And PTI got millions of votes in 2013. PTI had already become a bigger power than PPP. In 2018, PTI was an oncoming train. To stand in front of it would have been suicide. And no one, even in Pakistani military establishment, was able to stand in front of him. So what they did, what they usually do, the Pakistani military establishment, like what they have so far done, and usually they backed a winning horse, and they had differences at that time with their prime minister Nawaz Sharif. And Nawaz Sharif had, the cases against Nawaz Sharif were not started by the military establishment. They were started after the Panama leaks, after, the Panama leaks were in the whole world. Other prime ministers in other countries also faced issues because of that. So after the Panama leaks, the Supreme Court took the case because Imran Khan built a movement around that. The Pakistani military could not stop many things. So what they did was they they abandoned Mr. Nawaz Sharif because Mr. Nawaz Sharif was also not behaving really nicely with them. So eventually, Imran Khan was supposed to win, and they tried to endear themselves to Mr. Imran Khan, try to build, a good relationship, try to hijack his movement, try to put their own people. Like we know, Mr. Faisal Wada, they were infiltrated into Imran Khan's party by them. So they tried to completely compromise Imran Khan's party. What the Pakistani military establishments always main intention is to control the narrative, to control Pakistani politics. Pakistani politics can be controlled if you have people in every party, and if you ensure that you play one party against the other, and if you can ensure that each party is in your control. They did that with PTI. As soon as Pakistan PTI's government started in 2018, they started slowly to work against it. So Mr. Bajwa, who was selected by Nawaz Sharif, he started slowly to not exactly work against it. They were working together, but to ensure that the power does not actually go to the prime minister, that the power stays in the office of the army chief. So
Good.
when he realized that Mr. Imran Khan was trying to assert himself, that he was trying to take away that power, that Mr. Bajwa had like completely controlled, that Mr. Bajwa thought that he was completely controlling all the Pakistani political faction. As Imran Khan got wiser to his moves, Mr. Bajwa started fearing for his future. Because like I said, he was an ambitious guy. He wanted a long future. He got one extension, he wanted another. So as he realized that Imran Khan is trying to grow wings, Imran Khan is trying to understand the system, Imran Khan is trying to exert his power as the prime minister, and Imran Khan might even become bigger than I could handle. As soon as he realized that, he made a deal with the Pakistani opposition. He asked them, that if I do this move, will you give me a free path? Will you allow me to do all the things that I want to do? And I think the Pakistani opposition of that time, the PDM, made that deal with the devil. And that's how they came into power.
Thank you so much for your time today, Waqas, and thank you for breaking this story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Saman.